So when Americans grew up in the 1950s and 60s, things were very, very different. And I bring this up because we can do a comparison between people who lived back then and then people who are living, let's say teenagers back then compared to teenagers now and what they're exposed to. And we're talking about the mind in this course. So in the 1950s and 1960s, their main source of violence and perversion were these Playboy magazine, the black and white TV. We got about 3 or 4 channels. I grew up in the 70s, and that's how it was. That we had 11 channels actually in the 70s and 80s until we got cable. John Wayne is where we saw the violence and very sheltered, right? Pornography was limited and restricted to movie theaters and these things called stag films that were not readily available to anyone, especially someone under the age of 21. And if you think about today, wow, what a difference, huh? What a difference. We have televisions, 100, like square feet. We have televisions now in our homes. Some people do that take up an entire wall, multiple televisions in the house, and you have an unlimited number of channels if you have cable or whatever. And if you don't even use TV, you could jump on YouTube and find just about anything you're looking for. Um, it's very wide ranging, and even if a child has a phone, they have access to pornography. If a child has a phone, they have access to extreme violence. Video games nowadays, right? They're pretty extreme. In the 1960s, there were over 500,000 patients in mental institutions all over the world. In the 70s, mental institutions were closed down. Today, seriously mentally ill, we have over 14 million people that would qualify for living in an institution like that. Think about that. 500,000 to over 14 million in just how many years? 60 years. That's quite a jump. So, needless to say, mental illness is on the rise. All right. So, now, as I was saying, the most graphic images of sex and violence imaginable are readily available on social media, satellite, cable TV, and the internet. Children regularly view hardcore pornography and mutilation violence on the internet. I remember working in the high school, working with some kids. I sponsored a Christian club while I was there, and I was talking to some of the students, and I asked, I go, when was the first time you ever saw pornography? And the young man said, well, I was at a youth group at church. We were all standing around in the back, looking at it on somebody's phone. Their consciences have been seared. They don't even recognize, oh, there's something wrong with this, even when they're at church. We know we have these video games, social media, and DVDs. You can find anything. There's a lot of satanic music out there, and I've listed some of those. Satanic music. This is when we allow children to view these things, it's a form of child abuse. It really is. We're not protecting. And I don't mean we, you and I, but we as a society are not protecting our youth. And we're abusing them by not protecting them. And it really is adding to the searing of the conscience. I have a hairdresser. She won't watch this. I can talk about her. She doesn't believe in the Lord yet. She's got a lot of questions and a lot of contentions. But she's like, keeps asking, well, what about the people in India? And what about the people who never heard of Jesus and the Bible? And I said, well, they have a conscience. You have a conscience. It's our right and wrong. And when we choose, we know what the right thing to do is, and we choose wrong, we're not choosing God. Before we knew the Lord, we knew right and wrong, but we chose wrong. And that separated us even further from the Lord. And so the scripture is really clear. It says, there's a way that seems right to a man. I'm going to go against my conscience, but that way ends in death. And so I'm trying to explain to her, we all have a choice. And even though you may grow up in a society where you have no access, well, these days it's kind of hard to say that you have no access to the Bible, but well, let's say these tribal people, they will be judged according to their right and wrong. And did they follow their conscience? And were they seeking God? And did they even question? So what has happened in all this? And I want to make sure that, let's see what my next one is. Okay. I'm going to say in all of this, we see a problem, and we are experiencing problems. Some people are personally, and some people are experiencing, someone who has some form of mental health issue. So look at this chart for a minute. Like I said, mental health issues. Yeah, child neglect is causing children to become infected with spirits and develop mental illnesses earlier in life. This is in the past 12 months. We can see, oh no, I can't, I have to move this. Oops, sorry. Okay, so we look, so mental illness and mental health issues are different, okay? Everybody experiences some mental distress in some point of their life, most likely multiple times. Stress is one. Stress is the highest one. 52% says of the US respondents to this survey said, yes, I experience stress. And I have experienced it even in the last 12 months. Anxiety is a close second with 49% of the people that they asked, hey, have you experienced anxiety in the last 12 months? Yes, I have. 49% of them said yes. And you can look down the list. Depressive phases is like, feeling down, feeling bummed out for a few days. It doesn't mean you have depression, but it could be a phase of depression. Mood swings. Hello, ladies. We fall in this category. Who doesn't? I just had a major mood swing this weekend. I was like, what is wrong with me? I'm crying. I'm like, this rarely happens. It's a mood swing. It's not a mental illness like an anxiety disorder, but it is a mental health issue. It can become a problem. Having mood swings from now and again, gosh, we have hormones and that can throw us in to a mood swing quite easily. But it doesn't mean you have a mental illness. It just means that, yeah, your mind is not in perfect harmony. Feeling of loneliness or social isolation, 29%. Phases of sadness. And I would think that would be sadness for no apparent reason. Struggles with self-esteem. What does it say? 22% reported that they have had a panic attack. Oh, goodness. Sorry about that. Panic attack in the last 12 months. And then struggling with self-esteem, 25%. Oh, okay, I missed that. And phases of lethargy, feeling really, really tired. I can't get out of bed. It's overboard tiredness. And is there one more? I can't see it. What's the bottom one say? What's the one under 16% say?
Phobias.
Oh, good. Phobias. That's like 13%, isn't it?
8%.
Okay, 8%. Thanks, Yelda. I didn't know who I was talking to. Yeah, phobias. Phobia is not that you're just afraid of something, but it's a fear that's really heightened. For example, I was up in the mountains a few weeks ago, and I stayed in a cabin, and I thought my eyes were deceiving me, but a little mouse crossed my path. Now, I didn't jump and yell, but I thought about it. It startled me. And then sometime in the middle of the night, I heard the trap got it, and I took care of it in the morning. I think I was more disturbed taking care of it in the morning than I was seeing it run across the floor. But some people see something like that and they go into a full blown panic attack. It's a phobia. It's like they saw the mouse, but in their mind, it was like seeing a lion. Their life was in danger. That is a phobia. Okay. So it's much more than just being afraid. It's when the fear is paralyzing, or you fear for your safety. I wasn't afraid of my safety. I even got to see some spiders and a snake. I never really feared for my safety. I was just like, okay, you stay over there and I'll be over here. But some people can react quite dramatically to that. Any questions about these mental health issues from this study, this particular study? Okay, so there is oh, Natasha. Okay, hun, go ahead. We'll come back here.
So sorry, it wasn't from this, it was from the previous slide where it was talking about the music, and I was just wondering how techno music was satanic because I thought that was just like beats, like there's no words, or so I just thought to ask if it's okay. Thanks.
Great question. I hope I got answers to all your fantastic questions, meaning all of you collectively. Techno music. You take techno music, okay, we'll go with like a basic rave. So you have your techno music and you have your lights flashing. That can easily trigger somebody into a panic attack, anxiety attack. Um, it is that music also is rhythmic. It has a certain rhythm that has a spiritual component to it. I can't explain to you all the ins and outs, and it probably could be. It's Bible study all on its own, satanic music, but it's designed to put people into a type of trance. Um, the combination of the music and the lights and everyone moving the way you are, and then you add in some substance abuse to that, you have a recipe for disaster. Okay, Yelda's nodding. I got my confirmation from her. But the music alone, the techno music is hypnotic. And that's going to let spirits in. And that's why Mike calls it satanic. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? That was a good question. All right. Now we're going to go over some. So there is a book called the DSM, and it stands for, let me open my trusty book here and tell you what it stands for. Nobody blurt it out. I'll find it. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Okay. This this manual is what's used by psychiatrists, by sociologists. It's used by psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors. It's used as like their Bible, quote unquote. It's the go-to book to say, okay, this person has these symptoms. Let me look it up in the book to see what category or axis it fits into, or what type, how serious is this? It gives a lot of information. And Mike goes over it. He's using the DSM-4, which the last edition was in 1994. Well, there is a DSM-5, but I don't believe it's published yet. It's due to come out though. And with the first one was published in 1952. You see, we did not, America, let's say, we were not talking about mental health in the 1930s. Not really, not as a country as a whole. It wasn't until Sigmund Freud and really, I think Sigmund Freud was the first guy, and some others in that time period started talking about mental health and what could cause it. And they started theorizing about what are we looking at here? We're seeing some real irregularities in people in the way they think and they act and they speak and what is this? Now, it's not that they didn't have it's not like there wasn't people who had mental issues in the 30s, 40s, 50s, or even in the 1800s. But as a society as a whole, the science of psychology, I don't have the exact date right now, but it wasn't birthed until probably the end of the 40s. And so by the 1950s, they had some strong theories about what was going on, and the DSM was published. And so there were a lot of different mental disorders or mental illnesses listed then that are not listed now. For example, where do I see it? There's a maybe it's here. Okay. So for example, homosexuality. Did you know that Texas was the last state to say, okay, you can legally be homosexual in the state of Texas? And it actually was the act of sodomy is that what would put you in jail? Even if it was an adult, it doesn't matter. You were going to jail. And Texas was the last state to legalize it. So the DSM, homosexuality was removed from the DSM-2 and then altogether in the DSM-3. We're on the DSM-4 right now currently as a disorder. And transgenderism was removed as a mental disorder just recently in the DSM-5. Okay, so my correction, the DSM-5 has been published. It's a progression. We see this with different, especially the moral type disorders. It has changed, right? We have seen in our own just transgenderism, we've seen it develop right before our eyes. And young people are victims really by the adults, the sane thinking adults in the room telling them, yeah, it's okay, 9-year-old Johnny, for you to be Joanne. And we'll start you on, these medications so that you become sterile. It's very disheartening. Young people are very confused. I worked with teenagers who for over almost 20 years. And I'll tell you, the most confused teenagers on the planet are in junior high school. One day they feel this way, one day they feel another way. And to tell them that, oh, okay, this day we're going to freeze you in time on how you're feeling in this day. It's disheartening. Anyway, I want to go over from the DSM-4 that's listed in the book. There are different disorders. Okay. Now, some of you are going to ask me, which disorder does this famous person have? I don't know specifically, but I do know that they're struggling, that they have struggled. Okay. So, anxiety disorders are listed as acute stress. These are the different disorders under the anxiety disorders. You guys recognize this man here? He has a medical diagnosis for an anxiety disorder. Which one? I don't know. Okay. So what's listed? Acute stress disorder, agoraphobia, a panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. I'll come back to that in a second. Obsessive compulsive disorders or OCD, phobias, post-traumatic stress disorder. These conditions lead to unusual, overreactive, or inappropriate levels of anxiety. So our body, we have what's called a fight or flight physiology in our body. I saw the mouse, I jump back. The mouse can't hurt me, but I had an automatic response to it, right? It was a little bit of fear. It was a little bit of fear. It was a little bit of, I'm running away. I don't want that thing on me. Um, so we have a response to stress. Naturally, every person has responses to stress. And some stress, let's say a car comes barreling into your living room, you're going to have a lot of stress. You're going to have fear. You're going to have anxiety. And that's all normal. Your body released chemical called cortisol that sent you into a, do I fight in this situation or do I run away? If the car runs in to the living room, you're going to run away. And God put that there. He put that response in there. He put the whole thing together. We are so wonderfully made. It's awesome. And so when a person gets stuck, let's say, in one of these response systems, fight or flight, non-threatening events can feel very threatening. A knock on the door can feel like a car barreling through the living room. Okay, this is what an anxiety disorder is like. And I know this very well because in the past, when I used to see a psychiatrist and I had diagnoses, I had three. Actually, I can see a sub one on this list on my official paperwork. Okay, so what happened was I got a bunch of fear. I had a lot of fearful experiences as a child and a young adult. And the way that a ministry called Be in Health explains it is that your body is constantly releasing the chemical cortisol, and you are in a constant state of, I have to run away or I need to fight for my life. And so non-threatening experiences can put that person into a very hyper stressful situation, like post-traumatic stress disorder, where you're reliving the traumatic event as if it's happening for the first time in your life. And it's very serious. So this disorder I know about. The other ones, I'm just going to read them. Okay, this guy, famous football player, and he even tried to run for Congress or Senate, one of those guys. He has BPD, I believe. Oh, DID, excuse me. DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. Okay. And the DSM lists these dissociative disorders. These fall underneath that. Amnesia, Fouguet, which I don't know what that is. Dissociative identity disorder, DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, dispersonalization disorders. These conditions lead to significant disruption in consciousness, memory, perception. Oh, I can't see that other word. I guess I have it right here. Identity. It can really disrupt your perception of your identity. Now, from time to time, you might not feel like yourself. Your perception could be off. You could forget, have a short-term amnesia. It doesn't mean that you have a dissociative disorder or that you have spirits causing it. This is something much greater than that. It's when they disassociate from their being, and it's really a demonic situation because that demon is taking over, and so that person doesn't remember, or they're not consciously aware of their surroundings. If you know her, Amy Winehouse, poor thing, she died. Psychotic disorders, brief psychotic situations would be listed under here: delusional, delusions, schizoaffective, schizophrenia form, and shared psychotic disorders. These conditions lead to unrealistic sensations of taste, sight, smell, and lead to auditory and visual hallucinations. Typically, we see these disorders pop up or manifest, or their onset is in late teens, early 20s. However, the spirits don't care and they're causing it, so they can pop up at any time. I used to mentor a young boy. His name was Brandon. He was 9 years old, and they had diagnosed him with schizophrenia. It was very sad. He had such an abusive childhood, like early childhood, that he had some traumatic psychotic episodes that led him into a schizophrenic brain. When schizophrenia develops later in life, it's almost a clear indication that that's spirits. This can also be exacerbated through drug use, specifically marijuana. And so you can see that visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations. Now, I'm going to say this. If you have an occasional, F you hear it in your head, it's not very often. It's like, wow, that's a spirit for sure. It doesn't mean you have schizophrenia, okay? These are when the condition is significant. It interrupts everyday life. This guy's been on YouTube a lot. A recent convert to Christianity. And thank God, he needs deliverance though. Yeah, he needs deliverance. I think he's cross-dressing in his Christianity, because I think he's bringing in the new age stuff, the other stuff that he was involved in. I think he's mixing it with Christianity when I hear him speaking. But hey, he seems to have had a real conversion, and the Lord will work with anyone who calls on his name. So these are mood disorders like bipolar, psychothymic, dysthymic, major depressive disorders. So those are three major depressive disorders. These conditions lead to unrealistic and prolonged mood disturbances. So when you hear about someone who, let's say the bipolar, right? There's two kinds of bipolar. One kind is it's bipolar, but it's minimal, the change. And then you have bipolar where there's manic behavior, staying up for several days in a row. They have really high, and low. And you might know somebody who you're like, oh, that sounds like my friend. A person can act bipolar, but not have bipolar necessarily. If they're staying up for days at a time and then they're crashing for days at a time, yeah, they probably have a mental illness, but it's not always the case. Dysthymia is a mild melancholy, all the time, kind of on the low side, just low. And the cyclothymic is, I think it's a lower form of the bipolar, but don't quote me on that. I have to look that up. Yeah, the prolonged, this is the point of it, is that it leads to unrealistic and prolonged mood disturbances. So your mood is very disturbed. And that's what these the antidepressant medications try to level you out. If you're down, try to bring you up to a middle range. If you're too high, it tries to bring you down.